Doom.
Yes, please.
Start the game already!
So, my microphone has been adjusted. You may notice. It's funny. We were talking about the. Sorry, we should start with what are you drinking? What are you drinking?
Not enough. Short answer. What do I got? I got Backroads Vanilla Porter.
Oh, that actually sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
I also have a can this week. I have Coldstream Clear Peach Iced Tea. I don't know. Cindy went shopping. I got some interesting colors in the fridge. So, what I wanted to say about testing microphones is I did an awful lot of recording myself. And we were having a little bit of a discussion in Discord today about phrases that we use in order to test microphones. Because, of course, there's the traditional check, 1, 2, check, check, a Russian, a Swede, a Finn, check, 1, 2. That just gets boring after a while, especially if you're testing a bunch of stuff. And you mentioned that you use the 9 rings to rule them all.
Yep. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. And then there's the one that everybody knows, the second verse, the 1 ring to rule them all, 1 thing, blah, 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 blah.
Right. Which I think is really cool. And I don't think that came across in our Discord discussion, because what I was using was the Harvard set of something. I don't know. I found a link to it somewhere, and I'm like, and I said, like, when you're doing 2 or 3, or you're doing, okay, this is a mic check, that's a great thing to use, because it's got, all the right words, all the right sounds, all the right, sibilants and whatever. You can put a lot of emphasis on the various parts of it. But I should release, like, we should have like a NUTI extras. Where is it the podcast of me just recording all of, because I went through 30 or 40 of them. Just here's a little tweak, here's a little tweak, here's a little tweak. Now I think it sounds okay. Let me read like 5 or 6 lines, record it, and listen to it. Nope, not quite right. Tweak, 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 tweak. And I went through that. It took me, oh God, like 3 hours or something one night this week. Hopefully it paid off.
That's the hardest work you've done in 20 years.
It's the hardest work I've done outside of work that someone has paid me for in at least that long, yes.
All right, we're not getting paid.
Oh, yeah. Please, please, somebody send money to our Patreon that doesn't exist. We should set up a GoFundMe, because we're lazy and don't want to work. I don't know about you, man, but I don't want to work anymore.
Yeah. I never really liked bills. You're going to stop paying those too.
Yeah, if they'll leave a penny, take a penny. You're going to steal from the disabled kids?
So, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I put a bunch of stuff in there, and I'm not sure how much any of it is going to get anywhere. And I may have actually talked about this before, but I saw the quote again on Reddit. One day we closed autoexec.bat and configsys, and we never opened them again. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but in some ways I think it might be a bad thing. There was some discussion around the way that, I don't want to say millennials, because millennials are like in their 40s now, but probably the younger millennials maybe, and maybe the Gen Z, the older Gen Z coming up behind them, have a much different relationship with technology than we did.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we had to do a lot of, right, oh, I want to play this game. Okay, well, I have to load this in high memory, but I need my mouse, so that has to go here, and it doesn't work unless I put that there. And it didn't matter how much memory you had in the system, because, it could only, all kinds of bullshit technical details. But you had to learn a bunch of stuff about how the computer worked before you could play the game, right? Now you load up Xbox Live, push a button, and go. And that's both good and bad, right? I mean, the good section, it's kind of like our relationship, I would guess, with cars, right? Because I don't know about you. Like, I know some things about cars, and I can fix some stuff because I'm mechanically inclined. But Like if it's change a head gasket, I'm like, I'm not getting in there and doing that. Right. Whereas like not my dad, because my dad's useless at that kind of stuff, but like our parents' generation, they'd go, all right, well, pull it into the garage and take the engine down and, rebuild it and put it back in.
Yep.
Grandparents, anyway. But our relationship changed because cars became, they just work and you just drive them.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, computers just work. I mean, I ordered mine and it came and I basically turned it on and started using it.
And I had to make note of that because when you mentioned this, like the way it came across in the show doc was that like you were longing for the days. And I'm like, you fucker, you're the guy that like we were talking about building your computer and you just like, I don't want to do any of that. I want to buy something. I want to turn it on and have it just work.
Exactly. And I think that that's like the end state, but I don't know, it becomes that slippery slope argument, which I think is a largely disingenuous of, well, if people don't learn how computers work, then someday no one will know how computers work and then no one will be able to fix them. And that's kind of horseshit. I think it's like a lot of the home computing and the business computing stuff is coming out of the hobby space.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, I think that you and I are kind of a dying breed. There's going to be fewer and fewer people.
Technologies go through that sort of period of time where kind of like your grandpa working on the car, right? Like
Yep.
where there's a generation that knows everything about it. Now, you go back that far and it's probably because he had to service them in the middle of a war or something like that. And,
Yeah.
that generation had to. Our generation, the early computing generation, had to because the technology wasn't quite at the point where it just worked. And it was also, the technology was at a point where everybody was using it for everything. We talked about this a few episodes ago, I think, where, kids are growing up nowadays not learning how to type and they don't need to. It isn't
No.
a detriment to their existence. Their jobs don't require it anymore. That period from, I would even say like 2003-ish to 2016, you needed to know computers to do almost any job that wasn't just grunt work. And
Mm-hmm.
that's seemingly changed.
I mean, you have to be able to interact with the system, whatever that system happens to be. And I've noticed that, like that, the inability to interact with systems and figure out which data needs to go where and who needs to do what or know what is that's intergenerational. Like, I don't care if you're a boomer or you're Gen Alpha. Like, we're all idiots.
Oh, sure.
Like, okay, so I've done my job. Who do I need to tell? And how do I tell them? And here's a form that says I need to put my name on it. What do I do?
Mm-hmm. When you look at computers, the interesting sort of part of it, and this is going to be a double entendre because you made a joke about what you said, old man shouts at cloud, and I'm going to use cloud in quotation marks here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Unintentional, but a good one.
If your job before was, I work in spreadsheets all day, and whether it's Microsoft Excel or like Lotus before that or whatever, right?
Well, hang on now. Lotus 123.
Yeah.
Lotus is non-trademarked. Lotus 123 is
Yes.
trademarked.
Okay. If your job was working in that all day, there was a 75% chance your computer would start up and run it. You had to deal with oh, my keyboard isn't working. Now what do I need to do? Oh, my computer barely wants to turn on. Oh, what is that grinding sound? Early spinning rust drives, right? Nowadays, it's like, oh, I can't get into Google Docs or Google Sheets or something like that, some cloud-based platform. I'm no longer tethered to this single machine. I don't need to worry about fixing it. I can just get up and use something else.
Yeah, like my phone. Like, I have at multiple times, because our show doc is a Google Doc. I have multiple times edited it from my phone because I can't actually access Google Docs from work because apparently it's a security risk.
Mm.
There's a lot of cloud stuff that we're just not allowed to use.
Which, whatever. I mean, you work in nuclear labs. I get it. Err
It
on the
makes
side
sense.
of caution. Hard to
Yeah.
complain about.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. I don't complain, but Chat GPT is 100% accessible. I'm not entirely certain what's up with that. Like, people are using it to create documents. I'm like, I'm not sure we should be teaching Chat GPT our internal stuff.
What I find interesting is we now have an entire generation of people coming into the workforce that even when they were working on computers, in a lot of cases, they weren't working on what I would call real computers. They went to high school, certainly went through college, most of them working on Chromebooks because, that they did a really good job of, almost like Apple did in the 80s, pushing that into the education systems and almost making it a requirement for kids coming through high school in the 2010s. And those are the laptops that they used until, they got their iPhones or whatever. So even the experience of working with files on a computer, local storage, local drives, is unfamiliar to a lot of these younger computer users because they're typically interacting with cloud-based storage and stuff. And it's totally fine. Right? Like that's the new, I hate the word, but the new paradigm. It's okay that they don't know the stuff that we had to
for
know,
sure. For sure. And I certainly wasn't trying to suggest that they should. This is not me going, well, back in my day. It's just an observation of like how much things have changed. I made a note. There's a bunch of changes sort of to UIs and how we access things, which plays into that. But I'm talking more specifically about like pretty much everything has gone to a ribbon interface from a series of menus now. Like that new thing that Microsoft came out with, and a lot of sort of CAD software does that now too. Like pretty much every Office software I can think of has some kind of a ribbon instead of, because it used to be like file, edit, view, and then some custom menus for whatever it was. And now it's like, well, all of those are just a ribbon, which is the same thing presented in a different way. I find a lot of times though, people are changing that in order to make the product new. And that frustrates me. It's like, well, what's different? Well, we changed around where all of the menus are. It's like, but I used to remember where those were, and now I have to find them again.
Yes, it inconveniences you. There's a certain sort of, back in those days, those interfaces were designed around sort of rigid constants. You're going to be working on a display with a minimum resolution of this. It's going to have a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's, so while some of those changes feel like change for the sake of change, if you're still a person that's working at a desktop computer now with an even wider screen, when you look at how those interfaces have to adapt for use on tablets and phones and other types of devices, the reason starts to make a little bit of sense. You might not always agree with it, but you can understand why at least some change was necessary.
Yes, no, and there are some changes that make perfect sense to me. Like there's a lot of things that are switching from words to pictures. Which I mean, yes and no. My argument back against that though, like the pushback that I would give for that specific thing is if you have a piece of software that's going to work on a laptop and a desktop, the interface between those two should be at least reasonably similar. And if you're going to put it on a phone or a small tablet or something with, I mean, it's sort of crazy to think that like even like phones and tablets now are like 1920 by 1080 or something. Like there's a ridiculous number of pixels in even the smallest devices. You're not going to use Microsoft Word on your smartwatch, and if you are, like, I mean, kudos, I guess, but you're a nutcase. So there's a certain amount of, if you're going to put this on a device that's so different that you have to make the UI for this device that most people use it on inaccessible, maybe think about porting it or making a slightly different way to access the same thing and make the UIs different for two devices, right? As opposed to trying to turn my desktop with my 3440 by 1440 or whatever the hell my resolution is into a phone. It doesn't need to be a phone. I have lots of pixels. Please let me use them. Some of that is literally old man shouting at cloud because my eyes are starting to deteriorate and I find it hard sometimes to find the edge of a window to resize it. It's like literally I have all of these pixels and the border of my window is 1 pixel wide. It used to be 10. When I had 640 by 480, it was 10 pixels wide, right? And now it's 1 pixel. And not only that, but my pixels are smaller.
Sounds like a you problem, man.
Oh, yeah, probably. At least partially. I mean, starting to have some amount of sympathy for like my grandparents and complaining about the things that they did. Where I was like, "This is listen, old man. This is really not a problem. What are you going on about?" And now I'm like, I understand now. I get it.
You want these poor developers to maintain two forks of something? You're lucky it compiled once.
It's got a comment in the middle of it that says "giant kludge" to make this fucking thing boot. Ah. Oh, there's another thing I wanted to bring up, and another thing that grinds my gears. I've noticed a change in technology, is specifically in Windows because that's what I use most of the time anymore. Um, that they no longer allow you access to a lot of the under the hood stuff, right? Like there's a lot of control panel applets that used to be standard that just don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Things like the file association, you used to be able to actually control a lot more how it worked. And now it's just like, this is the program that opens it. Oh, and it opens in a new window every time. But I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, some of it is just dumb decision making, but some of it is, well, we now need to dumb it down for the people that don't know how this works.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm using Windows 10 right now, and it literally has two separate control panels. Because you can still get to the old one, but you have to know the command to get there.
Windows 11 takes it all a step further. Not a huge fan.
No.
Just various sort of things you can do to bring back some of the old stuff. Even just bloody context menus that just show it all. Let me right click on it once, show me all the shit I want to see.
Yeah. I don't need to click 17 times so I can tell what the file size is.
Yeah.
But you don't need to know. Storage is cheap. Just get a bigger hard drive. Or put it in the cloud. It's infinite, especially because now we control it.
Well, that's how they're making their money. It's the data.
Yeah.
Not making money selling Windows anymore.
No. Well, they give it away for free now, pretty much. So yeah, that's interesting because the last note that I had made under this heading was control the source to make a profit. Because that's how you make a profit, is you control something. Evil money. So we should talk about something fun.
Okay. What do you want to talk about?
I put a note in here that we need to talk about Tuah.
Okay, so I have no idea what the fuck this is. Now, for context, I mean, I'm not buried in social media.
I know.
Like a lot, but I do use like Twitter, shitter, whatever we were calling it last time, as sort of like an aggregator for content. I never use algorithmically driven shit. Like it's always, these are my follows. I have specific accounts I follow. This is my flow of data, and I try to tightly control that. And of course, my YouTube feeds. And I've seen, like, in the last week, maybe, Hawk Tuah pop up about 17 times. I've seen some references to Hawk Tuah girl.
Yes. So I will so I will explain it to you. It is a meme. So there was somebody who was interviewing drunk chicks on the road somewhere. She's from the South somewhere, I think. And the context is they were asking young ladies, I think, about blowjobs. And she said something to the effect of, "You gotta give it a good old hot Tuah on that thing." Right? It was a really amusing, just sort of, I mean, it caught everybody's imagination because it was just, I mean, ridiculous on the one hand. And number two, she was just obviously out having a good time and didn't really care about anything and just said the thing. Right. And it's like, oh my goodness. Like that's right out there, man. And it sort of showed up everywhere. And then somebody did an interview with her. Apparently her father's like a preacher or something. So they did an interview with him and he's like, "I'm very disappointed." And she's like, "I don't care. Hawk Tuah." So now she's selling hats and t-shirts, right? Capitalizing on her 15 minutes of fame, which I think is awesome. The original clip is really amusing. Like it's just honestly, I mean, it's not wholesome because she's talking about a blowjob, but it's funny, right? And it's just innocently funny. And the only really commentary that I want to make on it is that this is one of those things that the younger generation has gotten right. Instead of saying, oh, she should be ashamed of herself because she's talking about sex and girls shouldn't do that. It's just, here's a thing of somebody talking about sex in a really casual manner, and it's cool and it's funny. And I mean, she's drunk out of her gourd when she's saying it too, which
Mhm.
makes it even funnier. That's really all I want to say about that. I wanted to share a meme with you, and I'm very happy that you should look it up. You should look up the original clip because it is funny. I think that if it's gotten pushed enough that it might eventually reach the all your base or belong to us level of memitude. It could get
Wow.
there. It could get there because it's everywhere.
Yeah, like I've seen it pop up in my feeds, and like, you know, you look at my Twitter account, like my follows are hockey analytics guys. I got some gamer stuff going on. I've got like accounts for various podcasts that I listen to, and not a heck of a lot more than that. And the fact that it's busted into those circles suggests that it came out of nowhere. And my response has been like the ultimate old man response. What the fuck is this? And why are you wasting my time with this? Now that you've provided some context, I still think I've wasted my time, but at
Oh,
least I can
yes.
understand why some people are into it. Now, the commentary you provided about openly talking about sex and stuff like that and the younger generation getting that right, I totally agree with you on that.
I just want to throw something out there for you. It's just hockey Tuah. That's why it hit your feed.
Oh, I'm going to roll the outro there. It's been good talking to you.
Oh, I got more. I got more. Listen, old man. It's just this skippity riz gat Ohio that you don't understand.
The show was good while it lasted.
Oh, it's over now.
It has never been more over. Hey, do you want to talk some video games?
Yeah, let's do that.
I used to be an adventurer like you.
Stay a while and listen.
So it's a Steam summer sale, which means I made a recommendation and then you looked at other stuff that was on sale and bought a bunch of that.
I wouldn't say a bunch. I picked up Stardew Valley, which was your recommendation last week. And I played it for a bit, but it's still where I'm at right now. It's still a little bit too much of an investment.
Mhm.
It is very cute. I like the I don't know what you'd call it, the gestalt, the idea, the spirit of the thing. It's promising, and I do want to continue to play it. But right now it's just a little bit too much. Like there's too much lore for me to dig into. Um, while I was looking for that, Portal popped up, and I thought, like, I have Portal somewhere on a disc. But my new computer that I bought off the shelf and didn't assemble myself does not have a disk drive in it of any kind. So I thought, okay, it's $1.49 Canadian. Like, that's basically free. I'll just buy
Mhm.
it. So I bought Portal and I bought Portal 2. And I noticed when I was just looking around at things that on Good Old Games, I also had the Monkey Island season something. It's the one that came because there was The Secret of Monkey Island, which was a LucasArts game from back in the 90s, I think, which I really enjoyed. Monkey Island 2, which I only got partway through. And then I know there were some other ones. This is one of those ones that has like the animation is a little bit like a reboot. Remember the reboot cartoon?
Mhm.
It's a little bit like that, only worse. So I literally watched about 30 seconds of the intro and went, nope.
So, for context, because Reboot, although it did break into the American market a little bit, it was a Canadian cartoon. It was technically the first animated, like CGI, fully animated television show. It came out not long after Toy Story did as a movie. Did not have the budget and quality of that, but very of its time.
Mm-hmm.
The guys at Linus Tech Tips are actually trying to. They got some old masters that they came across, and the technology for even just like reading that shit is so very, very specific. Like, not just you need this type of player, you need this specific model from like these 3 years of this type of player in working order. They're trying their best to preserve the Masters, because everything that has been released since then of the show, and the LTT guys, they're Canadian guys, so it was, part of their childhood, and they're sort of into preservation and stuff. But everything that had been released on DVD and streaming and stuff like that was based off of old previous shit that was low quality, like SD
VHS.
quality stuff anyway, right? So
Yeah.
Even for something like that, the Masters, the quality of that would have been better than HD, like 1080p today. It would have been certainly better than anything that you were really capable of broadcasting at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of its faults, it was a very, very interesting show.
Well, it was charming.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
They had to censor it in some markets, but it was like shockingly adult for what was a kids' TV show.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do things like, oh god, I can't remember the
Oh, I remember
one of the main female characters' names. I can't remember it, but like the original version of her was fairly, busty, and they had to give her like uniboob to get past the censors, and I think it was one of the American networks or something like that. So they tried to re-release a bunch of the content with sort of original design and stuff restored at one point, and everything kind of fell apart after that.
Getting old Canadian nostalgia shows re-released is really hard. The Beachcombers is a good example of that. Like, it's probably not because they have all of the original Masters, but it won't be released because various various legal challenges from a whole bunch of different places. Music is a problem too, usually.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially with like old games, right? Like if you have licensed music in games, you just can't buy a lifetime license to use that audio.
Mm-hmm.
And those contracts will have expiration dates at which, your recourse is to make this game not available for sale anymore.
Yep. Sad.
Yeah. And when you reach that point, like it doesn't necessarily justify the cost of like modifying the game to re-release it.
It's funny though, like you'd think whoever owns the rights to the music would look at, okay, I can make nothing and put forth a lot of effort to block people from doing stuff. Or I can say, all right, I'll tell you what, like give me 2 points on whatever you sell it for, and then you make something for literally zero effort. But people don't think that way. They think I gotta maximize my profits.
Well, and you can't, because it is legal shit. You can't be setting precedents that you don't like. You can't be,
Yeah.
You can't blur that line for, what qualifies as fair use versus tight control.
Got to control the source to make the profit. Do you remember the raccoons?
Yes.
And Cyril Sneer? It was amazing to me just exactly how on point that commentary was for a kid's cartoon from, I guess it would have been early 90s, mid 90s. It might even have been 80s because I was young when that came out.
Mm-hmm.
That was an actual. And anyway, so we're a little bit off topic here talking about video games. But I do want to say I played through Portal and I finished the game. I'm starting to work on some of the advanced ones. I think there's one that I'm going to skip. I might skip most of them because one of the things that I enjoy about Portal is that it's cute and it's an actual game where it is, here is the start, here is the puzzle, here is the finish, right? And you finish a level and you can walk away. And I like that. There's no, I have to remember who I've talked to and what I've said to them and what their story is, or any of that. The cake is a lie. Spoilers for those of you who haven't played a very old game. I recommend going back because it stands up really, really well. Because when did Portal come out? It would have been 2010, 2012?
Jesus.
A long time ago. And I'm looking at it and going, like, graphics don't need to be better than this. Why don't we keep using this engine for stuff? This still looks really, really good.
Yeah, I want to say that, like, first Portal was earlier than that.
It might have
to
been.
2008, maybe 2007.
It's possible. That sounds about right. Um, i- I'm starting to get into like the advanced levels have a little bit more of that sort of Twitch gamer thing where you get to one level where like all of the android shooty things are in cages, so you can't get rid of them, right? You can't think your way around them. You have to like jump, dodge, port, jump, dodge, port, and you have to hit all of those things in succession. It's like playing like a platformer,
Hmm.
and that can be enjoyable. And some people are really good at it. Like I think that you would probably like just run through that with no problems. Um, for me, it's because I'm much more of a okay, stop and think. How do I get from here to there?
Hmm.
Right, and I enjoy that, and I'm good at it. And I occasionally enjoy the okay, I have a short section of I have to jump and react and do a thing. But when it's a really long succession of things like that, I suddenly become eh. This is going to make me throw my controller across the room. I think I'll just go read a book for a while.
Yeah. I've been considering a replay of Portal. I haven't played either game since Portal 2 came out. I replayed Portal 1 just as the second game came out, played it, and then haven't touched either of them since. So it's been a long time.
Well, here's a shocking thing because Portal is really good, and I remember spending a long time. Right, and I didn't remember any of the puzzles. When I went back to it, though, I remembered a lot of the sort of strategies about like how do you approach this, right, and what does that mean. Like there's some things that I took a while to remember, but a lot of it was still sort of there.
What you almost don't remember is just how short it is, though.
Oh, it's short.
Like you
Three
finish it in an
three hours.
afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the first time that I went through it, I think it probably took me like 8 or 9 hours.
Hmm.
Just because it was like, okay, so how does this work and how does that work, and now I got to figure this out, and there's nowhere I can portal to. This time it was like, okay, I understand how the puzzles need to be solved. I just need to figure out where the pieces are that I need to solve this puzzle. Still really enjoyable. Like I enjoyed it immensely.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if you want a thinking person's game, I mean, conveniently it is on sale now, but I don't know if I've recommended it to you before. Satisfactory.
I think you have. I know
Okay.
that you were playing a whole bunch of it.
Yeah, it's supposed to hit 1.0 like any time now this year.
Mm.
So the pre-release early access version of it that's been out for years um, has been focused on like the mechanics of the factory building and progression and stuff like that. There's a whole story that they're looking to drop on top of that they didn't give you a taste of during early access, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it. I mean, I've started 3 playthroughs of it. It is one of the most
Satisfactory?
yeah, a little on the nose. Like I didn't get into Factorio and some of the other like 2D-ish factory builders. I understand the appeal of them. Like part of what I enjoy about Satisfactory would also apply to those. Like it's almost like visual programming, right? Like you
Hmm.
have problems and you're solving them by doing, mental math and planning and there's a certain satisfaction to be like, okay, this is what I need. I need to be making, 726 of these an hour. And you've got all of these machines that have their own rates of production, rates of intake for ingredients. And you don't have to do it efficiently, but you want to do it efficiently, right? You want to, I mean, it's not min maxing because like the end result isn't really any better. It is just that is what the game is. And
Hmm.
you do things sort of slapdash at first and then you tear them down and you build it a little bit better and then you unlock stuff and then you want to tear it down again and build it a little bit better. Like often you'll play games you feel like, oh, after certain upgrade path or whatever, it's like, oh, I've just wasted the last 300 hours because everything that I've worked on doesn't apply anymore. And that's normally a source of frustration. It isn't with this game. It's like a fresh opportunity to like fix all the little things that have been nagging at you that you knew you couldn't get right the first time. You had a vision, you got to like 85% executing it. You're going to get to 90% the third or the fourth time, right? You're going to get there. It's a weird sort of drive. I'm interested in seeing what it's going to be like when they fold some story into it. Did you ever play Subnautica? I know I've talked about
No.
that game with you a fair bit.
Yeah.
Different sort of setup. I mean, visually, like there's some similarities in the presentation. It's more of a survival builder than it is like a factory simulator and management type game. But they did a really good job in the first game, especially of like subtly weaving story and lore into it. You're finding things like data pads and voice recordings and pieces of the puzzle that you kind of just, you didn't have to, for the most part, solve it. You know, the puzzle was just there and you'd sort of piece it together. And some of it was tied to a little bit of progression, but I'm hoping that they execute on the story in a similar way. The fact that Satisfactory, unlike Factorio, is a 3D game with a lush, vibrant world, and you're sort of moving through the world and exploring the world the same way you would a game like Skyrim or The Witcher or Horizon, just adds an extra layer of something that hooks you, you know? It's not a super expensive game, indie developer. I strongly recommend checking it out. It's one of those games that you will, it's kind of like playing Age of Empires at a LAN party. Just one more game or just whatever. It's like, I'm going to play this for like 15 minutes. And then you look up and it's 6.5 hours later.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I found actually that tweaking audio settings for my microphone was like that.
Yeah.
For similar reasons. It's just like, okay, well, this is good, but I think I can do better. I will have to look at that. Because it really does. I mean, it sounds like I remember enjoying like Sim City. Do you remember? Was it Sim Tower?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Sim Tower as well. I mean, it was a game that fit on a floppy disk.
Yeah, I'm not sure I actually played it. I've seen the game.
I mean, you don't have to. It's just Sim City in vertical instead of like XY. So it's XZ instead of XY, and that's literally it. But those kind of games hold a lot of fascination because you're just always going, okay, this and this go together, but what if I do this? Oh, I can do this and this. And, oh, hey, that works too. And as you say, you don't have to get it right, which is it's a really attractive thing where in a lot of games it's you must execute these 15 button presses exactly right or start again. Right? The idea that good enough is good enough, right? Better is better, but good enough is okay. I mean, that's
But there's something compelling about, it doesn't have to be right, but like, wouldn't it be great if it was?
yeah.
I saw an interesting take. I think it was one of the D&D YouTube channels that I watch. I think it was XP to Level 3. In the last couple of weeks, put out a video about Baldur's Gate 3 and mentioned something that I never picked up on my playthroughs. How much of the exploration of content and the way the game compels you to do stuff is telling you not to do it. Don't go here.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do that. You can't do that.
Yes.
After watching the video and listening and thinking about the things that I experienced in my game, I recognized just how many times I fell victim, in quotation marks, in a beneficial way to that sort of reverse psychology that the game constantly throws at you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a lot of games do that, Like usually the offer is very simple. It's not playing mind games with you. It is what it is, whether it's a puzzle game or a platformer or even games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. The expansion of that just came out where it's like, there's psychological warfare happening, but it is so obvious. It's like, oh yeah, you just, we're going to kill you over and over and over and over and over and over again because that's the game until you figure it out.
Dark Souls has told me that I'm not good enough to play the game, and I believe them. That's pretty much where my relationship with that franchise stops. There's some people who really enjoy it, and I've
Yep.
seen like I've watched some sort of short videos of playthroughs and stuff, and it looks like a lot of fun for somebody who's really good at it. I'm starting to get arthritis in my clicking fingers with my mouse. Nope, I'm not into those games anymore. I'm pretty sure that I couldn't even go back and play Diablo 2. Do you remember how much clicking you had to do in Diablo 2?
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that style of Souls-like game is not something that's ever really hooked me. I get the appeal for it. I think what probably turns me off more than anything is the strange success. Like, and the early games weren't super successful, but it was almost like a cult-like success where
Hmm.
video game developers recognized, oh, this is fucking amazing, and we're going to try and turn every game into this somehow. I don't know if you ever would have seen it playing EverQuest, but certainly in World of Warcraft, the mechanics of raids turned into that sort of cross between playing something like a Dark Souls game where like boss moves were being telegraphed visually and you're having to react,
Yeah.
and almost like playing Dance Dance Revolution.
Yes, that became a thing, and part of the challenge with EverQuest was that like the interface to actually give you those cues is ancient at best,
Hmm.
right? And when they start trying to, because I mean, like, EverQuest is built on spaghetti code, right? Like they're literally, you see interviews with developers, and they're like, "So I've been here for 12 years, and I'm just now beginning to get to the point with the level of familiarity with base code of the game that I can do work on my own."
Hmm.
Like that's how long it takes to become. I think they've made a lot of improvements over the years, and it's probably better documented now than it was when it was new. But like it's ancient technology, right? It released in 1999.
I bet you they still have developers going through source code for that game today, tripping over shit that they're like, "Hey, what's that for?" Oh, don't worry about it. That's for like the mechanics of Tank Simulator, right? Which is
Yeah, it was
what the
Tenaris
original
is what it
engine
was
was
built
based
on.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in around it was probably 2004, I think they did a massive visual upgrade, and a few of those things started happening. Between 2008 and 2012, there was a lot of stuff where it was like you have to go to different areas, and this boss has to you have to do this and this and this, and then you have to say this to that boss. It's also worth noting that EverQuest was originally developed by masochists, sadists, sadistic DM type people. Like there's the original sort of top level raid was the Plane of Sky, and there's a guy in there who's he kind of acts like a dungeon master almost. Like you say things to him to get the next thing to happen, and there's all of these puzzles that, like for example, on island number 3, it's full of Pegasus type horses, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and what you do is once you all get flagged to get up to Island 3, you literally send a small group up to Island 3 right away to kill a single one of those. Because I think it's 3 hours after you kill the first. It's some ridiculous amount of time anyway. You kill one, 3 hours later, the boss actually has a chance to spawn. But you have to wait that time. So you do that first, and then you come back to the first thing. And the guy talks to you in riddles, and if you say the wrong thing to him, he kills the entire raid. Like it's not like, oh, I do damage to people. It's like, no, literally everybody just dies. Right. And in the original game, like they've fixed this since then because it's just far too punitive for real life. It used to be that all of your gear stayed on your corpse for a few hours. And if you couldn't fight your way back there with like backup gear or help or whatever, it was gone.
Hmm.
Right. And some of that stuff was things that you had camped like 60, 70, 80 hours for. Like, can you imagine a game that you spent 80 hours grinding to get something and then it's just gone because your corpse is unrecoverable?
Hmm.
Ugh. And we loved it for some reason.
Yeah. Well, we were all sick fucks back then, and like, what did we have to compare it to? I mean, the
Nothing.
most exciting thing that happened at that point in time was like the text-based Daiku muds that EverQuest was based on.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, like it was fun because there was a community, right? And
Hmm.
also because we didn't have the internet to tell us where everything was. So people were just out there exploring stuff,
Hmm.
right? And talking to each other and things. Anyway, I mean, it's a lost time now.
Yeah, it kind of had that same mentality that like people that hunt for like Easter eggs and stuff in things now have, except that everything in the game was an Easter egg.
There's still stuff. I mean, like I've been playing the game. I started playing the game in 2001, I think. Maybe 2000. Because I started playing before the no, I guess it was in 1999 because I started playing just before the first expansion, Ruins of Kunark came out. Uh, and there are things that even now I like going back and playing the progression servers that I learned about the lore of the original couple of expansions.
Hmm.
So it like there's a lot of stuff, and I wouldn't say that it's deep, but it is expansive,
Hmm.
and some of it's probably retconned in. But, there was a lot of stuff. I mean, it's a big team that worked on the original thing, and they were all coked up. So they had lots of energy and they put lots of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a different time in gaming for sure. I mean, the games themselves didn't take 7 years to develop like they do now.
Yeah.
So while the core part of your team was working on all the bugs and optimizations and stuff that you had to do just to make them playable, like you could have one or two members of your team just throwing all sorts of shit into the game.
Hmm.
I go back and look at like the third Elder Scrolls game, Morrowind, still one of my favorite games of all time. And because it wasn't voice acted the same way like Oblivion and Skyrim were, the conversations and dialogue you could have with NPCs were endless. The books that you could find that would have story in them were endless. I couldn't imagine writing that much content for anything. Never mind content that like only a small portion of your audience is even going to see. It's great.
That's a funny thing because there's something about having lore that isn't going to make the main product that being there, that existing actually adds to the lore that everyone sees in a kind of indefinable way.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say undefinable, in a sort of intangible way, I guess, where you write all of this backstory and you don't tell anybody about it, but that backstory informs how you tell the main story,
Hmm.
and it adds a little bit of depth to it because without really making, I mean, you can do it intentionally, but even unintentionally, you're going to make oblique references to that stuff that's outside of the main view, and it
Hmm.
just adds a little bit of depth and mystery to it.
Well, it adds depth. It adds like you can have conversations about those games. Like, one of the thing with a lot of games that have lore is that like the lore is so spoon fed to you
Hmm.
that like you play the game, I play the game, and we really don't have anything to talk about because we've been fed the same stuff. There isn't a hey, did you see, or there isn't the sort of weird stuff around the edges that forces you to think about what you have been spoon fed from a different perspective or a different angle. And you get to do that in D&D games, but you don't see it in video games so much anymore.
That's one of the neat things about Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a bunch of stuff that even though like a lot of the sort of main storyline is not spoon-fed, but it is fed to you over the course of the game, there's lots of stuff around the edges that has room for, well, how do you see it? Right? And the arguments that people have about it are literal arguments rather than just, nerd fights. Right? There are people say, well, it could be this because of X, Y, and Z, and someone else saying, yeah, but that doesn't fit with, A, B, and C. Oh, well, it could be this also, right? Like there's all kinds of possibilities for it. Most likely because they didn't specifically think like this is what we're doing. They just put it in there because, hey, this is cool.
Hmm.
And then we can all speculate on what it means. And the developers are going, I don't
I
know.
don't know. Yeah.
I put it in there because it looked cool.
Yeah, we don't have answers to these questions. And, even if they did, we're not going to tell you.
That's
We
right.
don't
Yeah.
want you to know the answers. We just want you to
Talk about
speculate
it.
and talk about it. And theorize and yep. So you've been reading more of those books.
I have.
Do you want to talk about them at all?
I really only have the sentence that I wrote down there, which is the characters are still good. They're still compelling. But there's a fair bit of, trickle down economics is awesome, and rah rah America is the best. There's a little bit going forward in later books that is, some things about America are great, but here's a few things that we're going to do better because we have a second try at it. I don't know. I'm still enjoying the books. I'm no longer like, all right, I want to like avoid doing stuff so I can go read them, which is fair because I'm about halfway through the third one now, right? And by the time that you've consumed that much of anything, your enthusiasm is probably going to wane from hyperactive down to, yeah, this is pleasant. I got a minute to read a book, I'll read.
I'm not sure they'll be for me. I have this weird sort of like, it's got to be a health condition, sort of an involuntary reaction anytime I hear anybody say anything about Ronald Reagan. I either rage vomit or storm out of the room.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know,
And it's not, I want to be clear, they don't ever mention the man by name. They don't discuss politics in any kind of specific way outside of the politics that are happening in the books, right? Which is to my uneducated eye, fairly reasonable take on what would happen if some West Virginia folks wound up in 1632 Germany. But there's sort of an undercurrent of, because it's a book about an American town written by American authors. There's a whole bunch of like, we are very proud of our country and what we've accomplished in it and what we think. People from West Virginia who are, they're all redneck folks, right? They're hicks, and they know how to do stuff. That's my definition of a redneck. A redneck is somebody who knows how to look at something and go, "This is broke. I'll fix it." Well, I don't have the right part, but that's fine. I have some duct tape and baling wire. I can make it work. And they do a lot of that, right? And some of it is kind of interesting, and that's actually what attracted me to the book in the first place.
mm-hmm.
Was like, what would happen if you ended up somewhere where, you have guns, but you don't have the facility to make the appropriate kind of gunpowder for those guns anymore. So what do you do? Like, do you become a dominant military power? And the answer is like, realistically, no. Because, even if you have like the armory from your National Guard, like if you go into battle in 1632, you're going to be out of ammo in like a few hours, right? What do you do tomorrow?
So it doesn't have that scene with like Bruce Campbell opening his trunk, pulling out like the textbook in the middle of like King Arthur's castle and mixing ingredients and okay.
Sort of. Like, yes, that there's that sort of meta feeling of, okay, like, what are we going to do? Like, a high school comes with them, right? And there are some people who have expertise in those areas. So, but there's a lot of discussion about how, we could do this, but we don't have the materials for it. So we should do this instead, right? Or we could do this, but we can't do it fast enough. So we should do this instead. Right. And there's also a lot of acknowledgement of the fact that, like, hey, we have some knowledge that the people of today don't have, but nearly immediately they learn that knowledge and they're better at this stuff than we are.
Yeah.
Which is a reasonable thing because there's a lot of people back then who were like, they were very smart people. They just didn't have access to the knowledge that they needed in order to make their ideas work. Anyway, so it's an interesting book. It's like I think that I'm a little bit more sensitive to that undercurrent because I have more or less recently become aware of some of the problems with capitalism as a system, right? So seeing, hey, we're going to bring American style politics to 1632 Germany, I'm like, there are some problems with that, I think. And I'm not certain that you've addressed them in a fair manner. but it's a fictional book, so fair enough. I'll toss all of the objections overboard. I don't have any objections to it. I just have an observation of this is probably not 100% accurate.
Hmm. There's the fictional what if to explore, eh? Well, what if we explored the period just before, the height of Prussia, leading into the Great Wars and World War II, and figured out the one possible way of making all of that worse? You're still in the 1600s, so you're not there yet, but you you sort of extrapolate that out to the Franco-Prussian War and then World War One, and
Yep. I don't know. Anyway, there was something. Oh, I had something that came out of me thinking about this book. I had this sort of what if. So these people have gone back in time, right? So imagine if, like, in imagining how time works, I'm not exactly sure how to even frame this because the idea is nebulous in my head. But imagine that you, as a human being, are going to live a 60-year span. So you get to age 30 and you go back in time 100 years. There are two ways that that can play out. Either your time to die is 30 years from the point that you left, so you have to live through the 100 years up until your birth, and then through the 30 years of your existing life, and now you got 30 years left. Instead of you lived 30 years and then you go back 100 years, you live 30 more years, and then you die. So imagine if you exist from from your birth until your death, that is your allotted time. And if somehow you skip back in time, you still have to live through your allotted slot in time. Now imagine that happened to a bunch of people in Transylvania, round about 1600. And suddenly, ooh, vampires. Yes, these are people who can't die, right? And maybe that's why they can't die. I don't know if it's an interesting premise, but it occurred to me that, oh, hey, here's these immortal people, and here's why they're immortal. And I think we've already gotten all of the mileage out of that idea that we can in the 10 seconds of silence after I proposed it.
Well, do we want to get into some less ridiculous and outlandish fiction and talk about some D&D?
I mean, okay. I'm not sure it's less outlandish.
Time traveling vampires? I would be embarrassed to put that in one of my campaigns. Like, that's the kind of thing a 14-year-old me would put in a D&D campaign. I know, there you are, scratching out off the list. Fuck, there goes a whole arc that I was considering.
Well, I was going to do a one-shot, but fuck that now.
It'd be okay for a one-shot.
I think it would. I mean, the note that I put in the show doc was Shane might do a one-shot, and his response was, yeah, no.
I offered to do a one-shot, but like, the impression that I got from everybody was, to actually fuck no. So I'm not going to do a one-shot. Somebody else wants to do a one-shot, I will happily play. So for some context, one of our players in our group that we play together is moving and is probably not going to be available for some sessions. And we're already in that summer half hiatus period where we weren't going to be playing every week anyway. We left off last session at sort of a nice, interesting part. And the last thing I wanted was to be like, okay, I'll see you guys in a month and a half, I guess. Like, let's do something. We got some momentum going again.
I've sort of taken on board the idea of your sidetrack if we're missing a player. And I'm not sure what it will be or if it will be, but it is an interesting idea that I hadn't previously considered. So there is some possibility that we will go, all right, we're short of players, so we're going to do this instead of that for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought, what are we, like 6, 7, 8 sessions into this campaign? Not very far. We're not at the point where like we're really hunkered down into something that is super player character specific. Like, oh, we're in the middle of, rescuing this person's sister that's disappeared. And the session before we're going to find her, that player yeets off to, go camping for a couple of weekends or whatever. And it's like, well, we're going to save his sister without them. We're not into that kind
Yeah.
of story content. Like you're doling out sort of hooks and stuff at this point, and
Hmm.
you can dole those out later. You know,
That is true.
um,
I do want to, like, we've got to be careful, just because I know that your wife and my wife probably maybe will listen to this at some point.
mhm.
And in our last session, I gave you and Rich a secret side discussion, puzzle solving, undisclosed thing that the other players are not privy to.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of curious to get your reaction to that. Not necessarily to the content of it, but to the idea of that having happened.
Well, it's interesting. So I didn't fill Tanya in on the details. Like she was curious as to like, oh, well, we sat, you guys disappeared into another chat room for, a few minutes. And then we just acted like it didn't happen, which was fun. I enjoyed the way we kind of played it out afterwards when we rejoined the group. But this kind of goes back to the momentum thing of us doing the start and stop thing, because you did something similar with her character that I have a distinct recollection of. And then you made a reference to it in what happened with our characters last session, where she had it was literally like the session she became a bard. You did a thing where she had a letter in her pack or something like that
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You made a reference to it with what happened this week of be wary of
Mm-hmm.
musician mice or whatever it is. She doesn't remember that, like, at all. She doesn't
That's
remember that
okay.
having happened. And she's not, I love my wife. She's not a note taker when it comes to this stuff. I haven't been doing my usual dumps because most people weren't reading them anyway.
I was. They were super helpful for me.
I record the sessions. I mean, they're still there.
Well, and here's when you were writing your things, actually, the thing that I found most useful about it was, because I know what's happening, right? Because I have
Yeah,
the whole map of seeing what you saw, and sometimes you see different things than I thought I was presenting, and it was useful to know what the difference was. But I recognize that it is also like an effort to actually do those info
I'm gonna have
dumps at
to
the end of a
try
session.
and get back into it, just because, like, clearly, and I'm not singling out Tanya here, just because we went like a month and a half, almost 2 months without playing. Probably right after that, some of that stuff just gets forgotten.
Well, it was kind of a throwaway as well, right? Because it was something that was like, oh, like, hey, at some point, if you find yourself somewhere nearby, you should look us up. You might be interested or not, whatever. Right. And you guys went in a totally different direction for like a bunch of game time.
Yep.
So it's fair that she doesn't remember.
Yep. So getting back to what you set up for Rich and I mean, it was sort of a more overt version of that.
Yes.
Like, the setup of it is fine. It is, don't take this as negative, because it isn't a negative. It's just, I'm trying to describe it without actually describing what actually happened.
It's tough. Yeah, I know.
It is sort of pretty standard fair quest set up for role-playing games, D&D, video games, or whatever.
Yep.
Something happens, or you meet someone, or you find a book, or, whatever. And it's like, it lays a quest out for you. And you have the option to either go do that quest or not go do that quest, kind of thing. Sometimes the stakes are small. Sometimes the stakes seem big. So what makes it interesting for my character in particular, I won't speak for Rich, but we're very much the Luke Skywalker living with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. Like, I've made it as far as Tashi Station, but that's it, right? And now it's very much like, oh, there's this place that's far away that maybe you've heard of, and maybe there's something there you should do that may have some significance. And it's like, oh, okay, I got to put that in my back pocket, because, like, obviously that's not a tomorrow thing. That's very much well, this is interesting, and do I take this at face value? And it is, as is often the case when you're playing rogues, or in my case, I'm playing a Gloomstalker Ranger, where you're doing the sneaky, stabby, in the shadow style gameplay, hooks like that, affiliations with groups, like playing Skyrim or Oblivion or something, and it's like, oh, join the Thieves Guild, or that kind of stuff. Like there's a trope.
Yes.
And this very much fits within that trope. Like tropes are great because they're shorthand for
everybody understands what's going on.
Yeah. So this trope fits with our characters, but it is one of those tropes where you have to question the motivation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't take, and neither of our characters are the type of characters, I think, that just blindly take things on faith. That's the way I tried to play it out, is like, all right, well, I'll check in on this.
Mm-hmm.
I will make my own decisions when it's all laid out before me. It's an interesting contrast to one of the characters, one of the players in my game. This is the rogue that I'd set up. And I think we've talked about this whole Raven Queen thing that I did, and I'd established patrons for him. But what's interesting about her character and the way she's played it is I basically set up this Raven Queen as like, an interesting sort of thing. But step one of their relationship was, here's a list of people that need to die. And of course, one of the people on the list was like somebody that, technically speaking, is kind of one of their friends right now. So I set it up to be a little bit intriguing, but she leaned heavily into, for the first time in my life, I'm going to put blind faith in something, because this is the only person who's actually not been cryptic, right? Like, so much of what was set up was wrapped in mystery, and like nobody's ever giving their straight answers. And this person is like, no, these people are bad and they need to die. And she's like, yes, I'm in. I've questioned my entire existence up until this point. I've had people, never giving me the whole truth. And like, she has no reason to believe that this person is either. But at least on the surface, this person is giving her straight answers.
There's, even if someone is lying to you, when they do it directly, that has some sort of value.
Yeah.
Not dancing around it. It's like, this is what I want, period.
Yeah. So it'll be fun because I'll be playing it the exact opposite way, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to be, and the risk associated with what I'll do is like, does the delay or the inaction have negative consequences as a result of me taking the time to assess things for myself and make sure the morality of whatever I set into motion is going to align with my character's morality?
Mm-hmm. So from what I'm hearing of what you're saying about your reaction to what I've presented to you is more or less exactly what I was aiming for.
Yeah.
So that works.
But it is important to at least at this point recognize that, like, I've had a 3-minute interaction with someone or something that has sort of pointed me in a direction.
Yes.
That is literally like, I walked over in World of Warcraft to the guy that had the question mark over their head, and now they've got a grayed out exclamation point.
Yes.
I've hit the accept button, but I haven't done anything yet, and I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yep, and that's totally fair.
Yep.
Yeah. It was a really good characterization you made earlier about what's going on, is that like I am literally laying out sort of hooks and breadcrumbs for this is stuff that you may, right? Like you have kind of the overarching thing of, hey, there's this MacGuffin with arrows on it that we follow, and we find more things that make more arrows. Like, where is this going? Mm-hmm. Which is quite honestly almost very much like this is the way the railroad tracks go.
Mm-hmm. You're doing the smart thing that I like, and it's something that I try to do in my games subtly, and that is create opportunity for conflict between the player characters. Not like you hate each other and you're now nemesis kind of things, but more yes. This might create friction in the future. And it's entirely depends about how open you're going to be about what you got going on the sides. And whether you have an opportunity to smooth it out by sharing information or whether you just spring something on them later. Like those sorts of dynamics I enjoyed as a player, and I
Yes.
certainly enjoyed as a DM running that, right?
It adds an opportunity for complexity and depth if you want it. And I would make a subtle distinction. It's not conflict between the players. It's players having potentially conflicting goals.
Yes. Yeah. And that's very much what I mean. Yes.
Yeah, and it's one of the funny things because before, and the reason actually that I started going down this road is because typically Tanya, being an agent of chaos, I typically don't need to do that because she does it all on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular time, like when I first set up your characters and I said, these are your characters and these are how they will act. One of the things that I put in her sort of character bio was that, you get along with everybody. And I have to say that I'm very impressed that she's like leaned into that and carried it forward this far. I expected that to last about half of session one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And she's just kept up with it. Right. She's been sort of like impatient at times with the other characters, and that's totally
That's
fine.
totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's been almost zero actual party conflict. Right.
Yeah, and I mean it's very early on. Like there's that
It is.
impatience might lead to, whereas she's played characters that were, Dulcimer,
Almost
for instance,
antagonistic.
was antagonistic towards me, which
Mm-hmm.
was fine. Like that was like marriage therapy, that campaign. And then some of the characters that she played afterwards, like the Shade one, were just edgelordy, just like not specifically antagonistic, just generally like, resting
Yes.
bitch face kind of thing. It's just like I wake up and I piss people off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, honestly, like I have played with characters or played with players who make characters like that are difficult to handle for DMs and players alike. And Tanya didn't do that. I mean, I want
No,
to, I want to
she's
make that clear.
she's never crossed that line where like some players will play that, and when they do it that way, they stop the game from happening, right?
Yes.
Like it's, you have something that you want to do, the players have something they want to do, and those players just like, nope, none of that's happening.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing now, or whatever.
Hers were redirections. It was like bumpers in pinball.
Yeah,
It's like the
but
ball keeps moving, but it's going in a different direction now.
yeah, and that's sort of the perfect analogy, because she's creating movement where the rest of us might be trying to slow down, right? Like she's playing
Yeah.
it out as impatience or something like that, and it forces us into situations that maybe we would be trying to avoid, which is fun, even if like in character I might, express some frustration with it or whatever. As a player out of character, it's like, yeah, now we get to have a fight. We're
Yeah.
playing D&D, we get to roll some dice. Like I'm not going to complain about that.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And it just, I mean, it's funny because like I find it really, first of all, I found that a little bit difficult to deal with in the beginning. I find it much, in retrospect, much less difficult than I thought it was at the time. And I find I don't I don't miss it, but I do find that like it's an element of the game that needs to be added in if it doesn't already exist.
Mhm.
And as I say, it's not about conflict. It's about uh, just a little bit of like if you have a party of 5 players and they all want to go in the same direction all the time, then 4 of them are technically unnecessary,
Yes.
right? If you have 5 players and they want to go in 2 different directions, that's just about ideal. And if it's 2 and sometimes 3 directions, I think that's perfect.
Mhm.
And even if they're going in the same direction, but they're trying to get to a slightly different place, I think that works too.
Mhm.
That's what I was thinking. Um, yeah, there's a whole bunch of sort of background thoughts of like how to balance people off of each other. Which in this particular case, I think my solution to that is I'm just going to go, let it ride.
Yeah.
We'll see where it goes. Let the boat float down the river.
Yeah, everybody's at least now getting their time in the spotlight and their moment to shine and chance to direct the game. And again, it's very, very early, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our characters barely have goals at this point, so we'll see how
Yeah.
that plays. So, getting back to the what I put in the show notes, we talked about running one shots. You talked about wanting to do what I did. One of the things that I said was, I'm not sure why we're not just continuing like to play the game with a player short at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since that group has 5 and 4 to me is like the perfect number. You know,
Mm-hmm.
5's great. Not complaining about 5. It affords you the opportunity to not have to do a lot of rearranging and reacting on the fly. Like I play normally with 4 players, and when I'm short one, the difference between 4 players and 3 players in an encounter when you're trying to establish difficulty is significant. 4 to
Mm-hmm.
5, you don't have to change too much to make it work, you know? You can usually deal with that just by like, you know, selecting what abilities you're using a little bit more strategically so you're not skewing the difficulty a little bit too hard or whatever. I know it's summer again, like we're not in the full swing of things, but I would very much like to sort of set that as like the, hey, we're going to play with one person short, two people short, we'll postpone or whatever. Or if it's the
Mm-hmm.
DM, obviously we're going to postpone. And that's kind of what works really well for my guys. For anybody that's a DM listening out there that has struggled with this, playing with adults is hard, right? Because everybody has real lives. It's a little bit easier, I find, playing online than trying to get everybody to like show up at a location and, you know, deal with all of that shit. But stuff still gets in the way. Oh, I'm sick. Oh, my kid's sick. Oh, my pet's sick. Oh, I got to work late. You know, shit happens. Or, hey, there's a movie coming out that I want to watch tonight. When you're 40 plus years old and you don't get much time for yourself anyway, sometimes you just make those decisions. D&D is great, but I really want to watch the new Deadpool movie. So I think I'm going to be unavailable.
Yep.
Um,
It's my senior prom.
yeah. Historically, our group, with the exception of the one time Cindy was away,
Mm-hmm.
historically, our group, we've just postponed. My group, we have a sort of a strategic backup day planned. We normally play Tuesday nights, and Wednesday nights is a day that in most cases people are available if we can't make a Tuesday work. The approach is if somebody can't make it the Tuesday, I'll ask everybody, can you make it the Wednesday? If not everybody can make it, then we'll run the Tuesday a person short. If everybody says, let's do Wednesday and somebody else pulls out last minute, we'll run one short. If there's 2 missing, we'll just postpone. And for the most part, it works. As DM, you have to be able to react on the fly, particularly when you get into like later in campaigns where you have, I don't want to put this the wrong way.
Baggage.
My characters' stories are all very much intertwined right now. So when I say that I might go through a session or 2 sessions or 3 sessions where the focus of those sessions is sort of tightly tied to one specific character's arc, that doesn't mean I run games where nobody else has anything to do, right? Like this isn't,
Mm-hmm.
this is this person's session and we're an audience for this. Like everybody's, their shit gets so intertwined by the time you get to this point. But when I'll use my sister's been taken captive and we've spent 3 days tracking down where she was abducted or whatnot, like in character, and we're finally going to rescue her. We're in a dungeon or whatever it is. We've spent 3 sessions in this dungeon, and there's other shit that all the players were doing in here too. But like next session, we're probably going to find my sister, and that player can't make it that session. You don't just play it out as you would normally play it out, right? And like it's a disservice to them, but it's also a disservice to the rest of the party because you put them in a situation where they're trying to
Not quite rescue the sister?
but also like they're stepping on the other person's toes a little bit, like as players. As characters, you're asking them to be, the heroes of somebody else's story and whatnot. And that can be fun, but you kind of want to save those moments for
The whole group.
the whole group, or at least have the player that is sort of got the central spotlight focused on them right now. They need to be here for this. So
Mhm.
what do you do if, you're in the end of this dungeon that you've been in for multiple sessions, and in the next room is the room where her sister is? Maybe there's an encounter there before you're going to save her with the guy who took her hostage, and you're ready to bust that door down in that session. That player's like, I can't make it, guys, I'm sick. As DM, what do you do?
It's a tough call.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you can pull a sort of meta Mario where you kick down the door and he goes, "Ha ha! Your sister is in another castle."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you do the encounter anyway, and then the sister is in the next room or the next dungeon or whatever. But that also kind of like that sometimes throws off the, I don't know, call it the rhythm of the campaign, right? Sometimes it's just a little too convenient when things are not where you expect them to be, or when they are exactly where you expect them to be. Right? In those kind of circumstances, especially if it's only going to postpone it by like 1 week, I think I would probably postpone.
I try not to. There's been times where I have, but we've been playing basically every week for 2+ years, and you establish momentum that, like, we shut down around the Christmas holidays and stuff like that. But I need the game as much as they do too. Like it's sort of a mental health outlet for me, and I very much enjoy it as a craft, as a pastime, as a hobby. The short answer, my advice to any potential DMs is trust your players. They get it. It isn't all up to you. So, like, you dangle the obvious diversion in front of them. You can even just, before you get in character, say, hey, so and so is not going to be here tonight. So this is going to be an improv session. It's going to be whatever. Some of the best sessions that my group has had have been sessions where one player is away and we've done essentially nothing. Like, hey, this is going to be mostly a role play session. You guys you have an opportunity to rest. Maybe some shit's going to kind of happen before you bust that door down. But, what are you guys doing to make preparations? What do you like? I had an entire session that turned into like a burlesque show where they one of the characters, the bard slash blood hunter slash now cleric um plays her character out as a performative character that puts on a show and regularly dresses up and typical bard shit.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided, you know what, we're going to try and fish for information at the end that's sort of our base for operations. People are going to go start having conversations or whatever. And you're in the middle of a dungeon or something. You don't necessarily have this there. So I'm not saying do this specifically, but you can, as DM, you have the power to do anything. You can introduce something else there. They're trying to get rest, and their sleep is interrupted by they hear noises down a hallway, and you find people, or whatever it is. You can make something up. Your players will naturally, if you trust them, because they're in on why you're doing it, string that out into something that's going to fill that session, and it'll be fun. Mm-hmm. Those are the sessions that I've, as DM, like, you're usually worried, oh man, I'm going to have to scramble to come up with some materials and I don't have any prep done for something else. Like, I was prepped for this because it was for sure going to happen. Those are the sessions that I get to sit back, just listen, let them go, let them cook. And, they'll ask some questions or they'll decide they're going to interact with a character. And yeah, you got to do a little bit of improv, but not a lot. Sometimes they're just playing with themselves. We had another session that was a similar sort of type of deal. They'd finished an encounter and they ended up at a centaur's village, just sort of partying for the night before they set off to deal with this major threat. So they ended up role playing out a session where they were drinking, and it turned into basically like river dance competition where two of the characters were like competing to put on the best show and woo and please these centaurs, and just some magic shit can happen when it's like, hey, we're not doing what we had planned, players, so let's fill the air. And they do.
Let's play something else.
Mhm.
Here's a question for you then, because this is something that I've struggled with because I don't have any good examples to follow.
Mhm.
So one player is not going to be there. What do you do with their character? Like, what happens to their character?
You try and fit it into the circumstances. Again, the neat thing about D&D is you don't like everything doesn't need to be explained or plausible. So it's, hey, they're just sleeping in a tent, or you know what, they're beat, whatever. You guys are kind of doing this on your own. They get lost or disappear for the day or whatever. Like I used to try and have canned material that was ready to go for
Mm-hmm.
situations like this. It was more or less like it wasn't a part of the campaign necessarily. It was just, hey, we're going to play D&D and have something else going on, and then we'll get back to that. And I used to experiment and do some like fun shit. Like I teleported them out of what they were doing once to basically run D&D Mario Kart, like Wizard Kart, where I had a map. They were brought in. There was this tournament of champions thing that they were brought in to compete in. And when they got in there, they, ended up on a track with cars that had different abilities, kind of like playing Mario Kart. And that stuff was fun, but like that's a lot of prep to like have that stuff in the hopper so that it's ready to go whenever you might need it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the point where I just stopped doing that because as fun as that stuff was, it was a lot of extra work. And the one time I didn't have it and said, fuck it, we'll just see what happens and how it goes, turned out to be better anyway.
9 times out of 10, improv works out better because you have to improv it anyway. Because I guarantee you're going to prepare something and your players are going to do something that makes it all useless.
And what's interesting about situations like that is often what happens is it's like a palate cleanser. Like if you're 3 or 4 sessions into a dungeon, right? And you're getting near the final boss of the dungeon or whatever, like you've been doing a lot of combat. You've been doing
Yep.
a lot of miscellaneous shit like that, like mechanics heavy kind of gameplay for a little while. So when you bust it up with something that isn't that, it's a nice change of pace. Also, you can throw, I mean, yeah, you can do random encounters and stuff. Sometimes you can turn what would have been a combat encounter into a social encounter. We had,
Mm-hmm.
I think I hinted at it the last time I was talking to you. I've got them in that gauntlet thing, right? That sort of Running Man style thing. And they've now made their way through 2 of the would-be sort of mini bosses without fighting.
Oh.
The one I think I talked about is an aboleth that's just sort of watching them and has agreed to sort of, maybe there's an opportunity to team up, enemy of my enemy kind of thing. 2 sessions ago, my barbarian wasn't going to be able to make it. I had something else set up for the room that they were going into. It was going to be an encounter with a Gith woman that was like riding I can't remember the name of the creature. It's almost like a dragon without wings.
Okay.
I can't.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Sort of, I don't know, somewhere around a CR7 or CR8 stat block. I can't remember it offhand. The player that was going to be away, he's never outwardly said, hey, I'm an arachnophobe, don't throw spiders at me, but he's hinted that like, ooh, I don't really like spiders.
Right.
The map that I was using had a room that was like filled with spider webs and stuff like that. And it was my intention to like throw something else in that room, right? Because I wasn't going to throw spiders at him. He was going to be away at that session. So I thought, oh, well, let me change that up. I'll throw like a drider and some spiders, and it'll be a scaled down CR encounter because I was going to be short a person. And it turned into one of the best social encounters we've had in a long time, where they started talking to this strider. They rushed into the room before they were supposed to go in there narratively, just based on the game that's sort of being filmed, the production, this Running Man type thing. So we played it out that like they go in there, they see this strider woman kind of leaning against a back wall, smoking something like she isn't expecting to come in. They start talking to her and playing her out like she's, some cougar right out of an early 80s Long Island bingo hall kind of thing. And they're trying to get across this gauntlet because it was sort of positioned as like a death race where there was 2 teams in there. the other team they knew was going to be some friends of theirs. The whole reason they went in there was to rescue them. And they wanted to get to them before they were getting into encounters that wouldn't fight them. So it turned literally into one of my players talking this Drider woman into like, let me pamper you. You let my other team go by. They'll go deal with that situation over there. It's going to be like spider spa day. Like, spider massage, spider like doing her nails and hair kind of thing. Like it devolved into that kind of silliness through a series of checks and persuasion and role played out. Like their team Drider now. It was hilarious the way it worked out, and like comical, not just because it was silly, but like you get to play out a weird scene where like she's doing the spider spa day, just working the knots and getting right in there. And, she's acting like she hasn't been pampered like this for 100 years or something like that. And then the other players do what they need to do. They have an encounter over here, save their friends, walk back into this room. And, I get to narrate like, well, as you walk back into the room before you open the door, you're listening, behind the door, all you hear is just like, oh, yeah. Oh, right there. No, harder. Oh, that's the spot. Get right in there. So it's fun. So just roll with it. I guess that's the advice. Just roll with it. Play a player short. You'll make it work. Between you and your players, you'll make it work. One thing I did want to say, going back to what we were talking about earlier, what you set up with Rich and I, you did something I normally don't do very often. And I know a lot of other DMs do what you do. You told people, like you separated the party in such a way that like there was actual secrets. Yes. You pulled us into a different chat room in Discord. You talked to us specifically while everybody was waiting out of here. You dragged us to a different map. That's not something, at least with this group, I do very often. Like I'll create those situations, but I will let the other players as passive observers, as players, not characters, be in on it. And they're really pretty good about not meta gaming the fact that their characters don't know about what's gone on. Sometimes it lets them lean into that a little bit more, which creates some interesting dynamics. But
well, and I have done both because I did the sort of conversation that that Chris had with the dragon, right, where everybody. But this was something that I just wanted to be a little bit more of a secret. Which sort of plays into the subject matter of it.
Yes.
But also one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted the rest of the party to go like, what's going on? Right. And I was curious to see how you and Rich were going to role play that out with the rest of the party. And I mean, I think that you did it really, really well.
Yeah. It's an interesting appeal to a character's morality, right? Because my character, at least so far, has demonstrated to be a good character with sort of a sense of what is morally right. And the setup that you had, again, I'm not going to get into the specific details of it because other players might be listening, put us in a position where it's like, you can't tell anybody about this. This needs to be a secret.
Yep.
So there's that balance now of keeping this a secret while trying to still enlist the rest of the party's aid in whatever it is, and not, like normally they would just volunteer. Oh, we were pulled into the room and this is what happened.
Well, and that was part of the effort on my part, was like to just add a little bit of a dynamic.
I started lying, and then Rich, just rolled with it. Like he just went, yep. I started talking about a map, and he's like, yep. And the map had this on it, and there was symbols, and
yeah. And I mean, that was definitely one way to go about it. And like you could have immediately spilled the beans if you had wanted to, and you chose not to, which again adds just that little extra layer of depth to the story.
Well, it feels like the safe option, right? Like I'm not lying to them yet. I'm just haven't told them everything yet.
Yes. right. And that was kind of, honestly, that was kind of the balance that I was curious to see where the balance was, but I thought it was going to be some of, like, I will tell you something, but not everything, because some of the things are not mine to tell you, sort of deal. Yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes, because it's some of it is, as you say, a little bit of a test of, like, some of it is leaning into another trope, which is, you know, the trolley problem, right? And like the trolley problem, there isn't one right answer. There is more than one option, probably more options than I can see at the current time, and just all of them have different consequences. So we'll see where that goes. It's going to be an interesting story. One thing for sure that I wish, like, on the one hand, because I did a funny voice for that particular bit, right? And I'm not sure how well it came out, but I was very proud of making the effort.
It was a very wet voice.
It was well, there's specific reasons for why the voice is like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I just, because it's not recorded, right? That was like a one-time thing, because the recording was in the other channel.
Yep.
So nobody got to hear that but you two. That's my only regret from that particular circumstance.
It may come up again. There may be another opportunity.
It's entirely possible. I definitely am not going to be making any long speeches in that voice, because it was very, very hard to maintain.
Yes. I can imagine. I tried to do like the 80s bingo hall cougar smoker woman for 2 sessions now, and
It becomes intense very quickly.
like gagging by the end of the session.
Yeah.
Like physically.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It hurts.
Does.
We suffer for our art.
Yeah. I'm just going to say I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here because we've been going on for a while, but I am officially, because we were talking about doing world building together, right? We're like, oh, we're going to build campaign settings. I tried to help you with yours. It didn't go so well. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do my own. And then you started running games in yours, and I hadn't yet. I was, bogged down in the details and the things that I normally do, and that's just part of my process. I am happy to say that I'm officially going to be kicking off mini campaign stuff in that setting. Starting very soon, I'm going to use my other group as guinea pigs. We're going to do a session 0, probably not this Tuesday, but next week after that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe run 1 or 2 sessions in it. It's interesting. I've set up my world, and I know this is basically like the definition of every fantasy world, but I've intentionally set up my world so that I can run very different styles of games in it. I talked about the setting a little bit, so I won't get into it. I mean, it's very tropey fantasy kind of stuff with a splash of like ether punk or arcane punk on it. I was doing some brainstorming for what kind of like mini campaign things I could run, because I wanted to run some paid games eventually. And I got into the sort of stranded expedition thing that was going to be like a hex crawl style game I wanted to run. I've got sort of an Indiana Jones style kind of romp in the desert, sort of MacGuffin style campaign that I'm going to flesh out. Inspired by the horror show that you put our players through in your Curse of Strahd campaign, I have a survival mini campaign that I want to run. There's a city in my world, the first city that they established after coming to this world, called Prima. I don't know, super original. Didn't last very long because like the dangers and horrors of this world led to the fall of that city very, very quickly. Think like, Creatures from the Mist style kind of thing. So I'm going to run a campaign in that. But the one that I'm going to run first is going to be more of an urban campaign. Without spoiling too much of it, session 1 is going to begin with the execution of all the players.
Oh,
Failed
I see.
execution, probably.
First time, huh?
Yeah. Basically. Basically, it's going to be that. The basic setup is it's going to be sort of a Moriarty style kind of villain that's sort of pulling the strings, a little bit of criminal underworld stuff, but like very, not mustache twirling kind of thing. Like think, honestly, I'm going to use the way they handled the Moriarty stuff in Elementary as sort of like a building off of point.
A blueprint.
Yeah, like it's the person is somebody who you wouldn't expect to be that character. I don't know who it is. It'll probably change for every campaign that I run in it, depending on what they're going to set up. The basic setup for the game will be, as I have them create characters, it's going to be just sort of a bullet point backstory of like 5 things. You have a reason to be snooping around, right? The setup for this sort of execution that happens session 1 is that you got caught snooping around. You were asking questions in the wrong place. You were being nosy in the wrong place, or maybe, your character is inconvenient to this organization in one way or the other and needed to be, you're a chess piece to take off the board. And then execution kind of happens. I'll give the players a chance to try and get out of it, but realistically, like they're not meant to die there. It will be a failed execution. They will then have their personal character motivations as well as maybe a little bit of revenge to try and figure out who this shadowy organization is, what they want, what's behind it. And as they get into it, sort of uncover more of the, what's the, there's a term. I can't think of it. It is based on a bad guy character from the Gargoyles cartoon. Xanatos principle?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Xanatos was the guy's name.
Yeah. Anyway.
Where he's a good guy, bad guy?
No, more the sort of the complex, sort of a Moriarty style thing where like they're just setting up conditions for their own success, right? And often like whether you foil their plans or not, you're still somehow playing into the benefit for them,
Yeah. They win no matter what you do.
Yeah, and you've got to overcome that. You got to outsmart them eventually, beat them at their own game. They won't be a player that you find them, you bust into their hideout and you kill them like you would a normal D&D boss. You got to
there's a reason that's not a normal D&D boss. That's tough to orchestrate.
Yeah, it will be. It's going to be an interesting challenge, but it's because it's a mini campaign, it's going to be sort of a set piece kind of thing where like, I'm going to lay out that, there's going to be places they're going to naturally go to try and figure out who this is going to be. Their characters will have sort of an initial setup like, hey, where were you when you were abducted? What were you snooping into? Were you looking at, sort of asking questions down in this market or paying attention to shit that was going on down at this warehouse? I have the city that it's taking place in, Ragos, is I've got an idea that's not fleshed out yet for an actual encounter that draws inspiration from I don't know if you remember the city of Severin from the second Patrick Rothfuss book. It was the second city that he moved to where he had the close relationship with the person that was ruling it. But the city was almost built on 2 levels, and there was a lift that sort of took him up and down.
I remember that.
I've designed the city that this takes place in sort of similar to that, where it's going to have 2 levels and a lift system where I want to create like a mid-air encounter.
Donkey Kong.
Yeah, the basic setup might be they're trying to foil an assassination that's planned on this lift or something like that, and whatever happens. I'm not, it isn't a linear sort of like, this is what's going to happen in that encounter. It's like, here's the setup for it. You guys are in a situation where you're suspended in the middle of the air. I told you I wanted to, like a while ago, try and recreate something that felt like the minecart scene from Temple of Doom, right?
Which was a great scene.
And if you could try and recreate that sort of energy, but that sort of back and forth sort of environmental movement and stuff.
That's a great place for the technical idea of a skill challenge.
Yeah, so my idea is like I'm not thinking elevator lifts. I'm kind of envisioning almost like a gondola style thing. My world sort of
Okay.
lends itself well to having not high tech shit, but like think of the slightly arcane version of a steampunk version of like a ski lift, right?
Right.
These sort of carts that are on cables that are being sort of moved up and down, kind of like the minecart scene where you might have the ability to influence the way they're moving. You have the ability to maybe like jump from cart to cart, do some interesting thing, but there's like a lot of risk in doing anything, and a lot of ways to influence the encounter that doesn't involve pull out your weapon and hit somebody with it,
Yes.
you know?
Which is the major argument for why martial characters are boring. I've never found that, but a lot of people do, and that's why, right? It's because there's not a lot of things for them to do other than I bonk somebody with, my big
Yeah.
stick or my big metal stick or my big metal stick with a knob on the end.
Yeah. And I mean, it's up to the DM to create sort of environments where they can do something other than that. Like, I don't hit them with my big stick. I chop down the tree with the big stick to do something else, or I can interact with the environment in some way. Thinking about this gondola situation, it's like, well, if you can get the good people onto one cart, you can try and break the cables on the other one, right? And whatever. Like, there's just lots of in my head. It's going to be great.
In reality, it might be, it might not.
There's a reason why I want to play test this stuff and turn some knobs and make adjustments before I start asking people to pay money to run these games and stuff like that, or run it for players that I'm not familiar with. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I've committed to it. Session 0 is going to be in like a week and a half at this point. My campaign setting is it's actually going to see some use, which is great.
Very cool.
Well, I think it's time to wrap it up. It's almost been a couple of hours. You do have a parting gift.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Anybody want a peanut?
I may have actually mentioned it before. I am not 100% that I haven't, but there's a puppet show on YouTube called Glove and Boots, and it has basically it's done now. I think they've stopped making it, but it's the second time that it's stopped. So who knows? It might come back. But it started off as kind of, I can't remember whether it started off as more of an adult thing and it came back more for kids, or if it did the other way around. But it has an awful lot of there's an awful lot of things on the internet that you've heard in like musical memes that you will recognize from this show. It's a good show. It's clever. It's basically it's a gopher, I think, or a groundhog or something, and a dude, and they're both puppets, obviously, and they talk about lots of stuff and grammar, and just just go watch it. Glove and Boots. It's hilarious. You will laugh.
I've never heard of it. I've certainly never watched it that I'm aware of. I'm definitely going to have to check it out.
It's worth a watch. It's good.
Last thing before we wrap up, I just want to give a little bit of a shout out. You wrote a question in our notes about the pod bag about where Ian is, where his finger's broken. Yes. He's been a very, very busy man. And the culmination of all of that is he's on his way to Hawaii today, I think, because he's going to get married.
Well, congratulations, Ian and Mrs. Ian.
Yes. Shout out to Ian and Carrie. You both deserve all the happiness. Enjoy running off and eloping in Hawaii. That's definitely the way to do it.
May your first child be a boy child, or a girl child, or whichever you prefer, or either or neither or both. It's all fine.
I think they got a cat.
Perfect. That's the best child of all. Kids are like meth. Not even once.
4 times, man.
Yeah, you're hooked. You're hooked. See? They got you.